So again, I'm trying, Morgan, I'm not seeing.
Your owner
now.
just disappeared, so I guess they didn't want to let you know who they were.
Okay, well, there we go. If they come back, we can try that again. So then moving on to Portrait of a Grad discussion, and Wendy. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Mary. Thanks for having me. And, I'm here really just to be sort of a part of the conversation. I'm not sure, what the best way I can be supportive tonight is. I can certainly explain where we are in the process of things. I know Courtney sent out the recording that some of the Discovery Committee was able to make as they shared the work with Lynn and Jody as well. Gabrielle, who was part of the committee, is also here. So really I'm here to be of service and support in whatever way is most helpful.
So I'll just start by saying Wendy has done, she's been with us since the start of the Portrait of a Graduate work, back when she lived in Vermont, and is now across the lake over in New York, and has stayed with us and has been patient through the COVID pandemic as we have leaned back into this work. So the Educator Discovery Committee has had the opportunity to look at the work that the students recommended in the draft Portrait of a Graduate, and they gave us a response to that work. So I'm hoping you've had the opportunity to look at that document and to look at the video recording of the presentation that the educators gave to Jody and I. And I was thinking it would be helpful if we could talk through any questions you have about that process or about what the educators shared, because the next phase that we would be leaning into would be the implementation committee phase that would be working from now through the summer to before they would come back to you and report back in terms of where they are at the end of their charge. So at first, are there any questions about the Discovery Committee work?
I guess I got, I'm not sure the questions or comments or whatever, but is there somebody on the committee from Cold Hollow Career Center?
Yes, there, Heather, right? Heather was from the Cold Hollow Career Center, and actually even though on the video that you saw, this was actually a concern of the members who were able to join in that day. I think everybody there was from Enosburg. The representation of the 17 or 18 members that participated in the committee was from across Franklin Northeast. So it was actually a good representation of folks.
Okay, and then, so one of the things, so you had it coded, green and yellow and red, right? So one of the things that I think some of the stuff didn't surprise me very much where it was coded, but the one section that really surprised me as being coded red was creative thinker. And that really surprised me, I think. Especially I think somebody mentioned, well, that's only kind of thought about in the music or art world. But I mean, almost any the sciences, all that stuff involve creative thinking. So it really kind of surprised me that that was coded red. And I didn't know if you had any comments about that or not.
I certainly can offer a thought, and I would invite Gabrielle to do so also, if I've forgotten something that might be important or it need to be straightened out. I think what this committee did extremely well was identify places where things were unclear or where the educator population would take a step back, and say, oh, wait a minute, what is that? How does that align with what we already talk about, what we already prioritize, the way we already think about delivery? And there were a couple of things that were clear about the creative thinking. One was it wasn't just problem solving, which is, I think, often the way we talk about that in the educational world, right? We talk about being problem solvers and approaching problems from lots of different perspectives. And the students were very clear to say, it's more than that. It's really becoming a flexible thinker and thinking about things that are not just problems, they're just ways to work through different considerations that are in front of you. So in all different disciplines. So that was one thing that just needed greater clarity. And the other piece that I remember that might be important to share is that building creative thinkers in disciplines other than the arts takes very specific pedagogical approaches, meaning, your classroom instruction needs to build creative thinkers intentionally. Probably not everybody uses those kinds of approaches to instruction consistently throughout Franklin Northeast. And there may be some belief issues there as well, where people are saying, well, wait a minute, is that really a mainstream approach that we should be thinking about? And so those are two reasons that I think come to mind the most about why it was read, because there's larger conversation needed to make sure we understand what we're talking about, and also what does this really look like and what training is required in order for this to be adopted as a graduation requirement. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And I also have a word to look up. What was that word?
Pedagogical?
Yeah, I gotta look that one up.
Vocabulary word for the night, done. Good.
Yeah, exactly. So I have a question actually that kind of feeds off that. So I saw the draft of the Portrait of the Grad. Is the idea that those concepts, those skills would be taught through the content, or would this become the focus of the pedagogy? Yeah.
I think it's best to turn that one over to Lynn and or Jody, because that came up actually a little bit. And I think there are some ways to think about that in terms of the conversations you already have going that would be good for them to respond to.
So Jody, I don't know if you want to jump in here, if you want me to get started.
You can go ahead and get started, Lynn. Can you guys hear me? I'm having internet. Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think of them as being separate and distinct, Polly. I think that these are definitely woven into the content that we teach with students. And I think that the idea is that these would be skills that are interwoven in a K-12 continuum, and students would have opportunities to be able to provide evidence, and that evidence wouldn't be absent content in my mind. It would be inclusive of content, and it could be demonstrated in a variety of ways. It could be demonstrated in a variety of contents as well. Before I turn this over to Jody, I just want to add on to what Wendy was saying to Rick. I think one of the key takeaways I heard from the teacher discovery committee is that the red doesn't indicate necessarily an opposition to the focus as much as we would have to be really clear not only in how we teach it, but the scarier part is how do you assess that in an objective way if it's going to be high stakes and result in a graduation requirement. So that is one of the takeaways. And Wendy, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's definitely something I heard loud and clear.
I do think that is the work of the implementation groups who would pick up the work next, is to kind of tease out, especially with those, well, with everything. But the things that are in red, it may take a bit longer to tease some of those out because they're a little more complex about what does that mean for our instruction? Does it show up best in content, or does it show up best in pedagogy?
Because that's where I was kind of struggling, is that, these are, I mean, all of those attributes we want our graduates to have, right? That would lead to success. But then I kept saying, like, well, the one piece that seems to be missing is actually being literate. right? There's financial literacy, there's emotional literacy, but what about the actual skill of being a literate person, right? And so then I was wondering, well, maybe it's because these are being funneled through content, and then it's a non-issue.
So Polly, probably really what your question is driving at, as I listen to it more, is one of the recommendations or cautions that shows up toward the end of the presentation, which is the consideration of whether to make sort of academic proficiency, as we think about it, an 8th characteristic, or whether to put it as a foundational building block that comes up through everything else. And that was something that the committee, there wasn't consensus about the best approach to that. And so that shows up as something that really needs to be worked through as the implementation committee picks this up and begins to kind of think more carefully about that and make some recommendations about how to move forward.
So does that question need to be decided before the implementation committee picks that up? I would think that would be a fundamental question before you try to implement that.
I would let them hash through it a little bit with all of the considerations about the structures you currently have, the way that you approach things, the other things that you have in play, and let them come make a recommendation to you about that. That's probably what might make the most sense, given, I think, the breadth of professional conversation that still needs to be had as people are understanding these things. Yeah, that's my recommendation. That said, however you approach it, I'm sure we'll move it forward.
I do think, Jody, part of our thinking around the membership of implementation committee also included some board representation, correct?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And my understanding too is that the implementation group is not, it's not necessarily having the purpose or the goal of figuring out how do we implement this next year, but rather figuring out what needs to be worked through in order to implement.
Or maybe you also would be able to say, these are the things that need to happen. These are the decisions that need to be made along the way. This is when these characteristics need to be finalized. This is how the first, stage of implementation can happen. This is what happens in the second stage, things like that. So there's plenty of time to, COVID really has given you as you know, obviously, quite a blow in terms of your timing of these things. So you're going to have to kind of pick that momentum up and move that forward carefully with everybody together, building that understanding.
I have a question, kind of follows, to segue a bit from what Polly was talking about. I'm trying to understand how the kind of characteristics of the graduate that that you've outlined so well here, of how that intersects with the proficiency kind of standards, and then the nuts and bolts of just the academics. So I know we were just kind of unpacking that, but one thing that I've noticed and I don't have a high schooler, but at the middle school age group for proficiency-based standards, is this kind of this challenge around like objectivity, subjectivity, and whose perspective matters when we're talking about proficiencies. So like maybe a somewhat like lighthearted example is I have an 8th grader who's, really fit, active, good athlete, and he keeps getting these D's in everything in his physical education. And it's fine. Like, it's not really consequential in any significant manner in 8th grade physical education. But what he says to me, he's like, well, I don't understand. Like, this teacher doesn't see me doing all these like athletic things, these things that are active and showing I'm living a healthy life. They don't see me at home. They don't see me on the farm. They don't see me biking and hiking. And they see me for, 45 minutes a week, maybe in the classroom. And so it's this kind of, I just am wondering, how do we, like, do we allow the students to kind of have a voice in, I feel I'm proficient in this, and why don't you, why don't you as the teacher kind of see this, and how do we kind of bridge that gap? Because, the school day only encompasses a certain, amount of hours of a kid's life. And so when we're looking at the high school level of things like trustworthiness and financial literacy, there may be lots of ways in that student kind of life, even outside of the school day, that they're demonstrating that. And so I'm just wondering, like, when we overlap the portrait of the graduate with the kind of, the nuts and bolts of academics, and then all the other kind of things that encompass a student's life, are we going to structure some of these proficiencies and this assessment that's based around proficiencies, and allow the kids to also have a voice, like a way to say, I do this, and this is what this is one thing that I feel like, shows that I'm trustworthy, and I'm, making good, healthy relationships and building trust with people in my life, because teachers may not even see some of these things that the kids are doing, because their lives encompass a lot more than just what happens during the school day. So that's just kind of one of my kind of questions around, how do we integrate this and really allow the students, some of it to be really student driven too, especially around sense of self within this framework, and beyond just the nuts and bolts of kind of the academic day.
It's definitely a difference, Mary, between what's happening in our middle schools right now. I would say it's a little more standards based and less about proficiency based learning at our middle schools. We just haven't done the work there yet. The shift to the proficiency based learning and graduation requirements, it's exactly what you just said. The students are a central part of that work in demonstrating their understanding, and us being able to accept that they can demonstrate that understanding in a variety of different ways in modalities is really kind of key in this work. I know this is, Jody and Gab are probably chomping at the bit right now, because this is definitely their wheelhouse, and I'm sure they both have something to say about this exact question.
There are lots of great examples of exactly what you were just describing, Mary. And a critical piece of that work is having indicators of proficiency. And if you have good, strong indicators of proficiency, then it's a much easier, nuts and bolts type of thing to have a system where kids can submit evidence and justify why their evidence is proficient. And actually, a lot of times if a human being, it doesn't matter if they're a student or an adult, can do that, they really have internalized what the characteristics of proficient are when they can justify where it lives in their own work. So there definitely are systems and structures that exist that allow for those types of things to happen.
I think one of the things that we talked about briefly relative to some of the characteristics that that are more experiential maybe, and can use, they might be able to be demonstrated in a number of different contexts, as you mentioned, Mary, is that it's going to be important for students to be able to demonstrate these things maybe in more than one context. So if you are trustworthy on the farm, this is an example that we used, then that may be the place where you are best able to learn about trustworthiness. How do you demonstrate that same trustworthiness in another context is, as Jody is saying, deepening, the evidence that you understand and are able to apply that. Whereas if the farm is the only place that you can demonstrate trustworthiness, you may not really be ready to be out in the world yet, with a stamp that graduation requirement has been met. So those are all kinds of conversations that that's the kind of thing that the implementation team would begin to wrestle through in a practical way. What would that look like practically, to be able to get that done? So your questions are all, kind of heading in that direction, that's great. Gab, did you want to add anything else?
I mean, maybe I'll just add, I think Lynn's right that the work at the middle school level really around proficiencies is more around standards based, not proficiency based. And there is a little bit of a difference. And, Enosburg's been working for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now to develop sort of a model. And I think there's a scalable model there that hopefully will start to become more visible. But I think there's a lot of systems and structures changes that have to occur in order for what you're talking about to take place. And those have been pretty tricky. So it's happening, but it's so slow moving because the structures are really, really hard to sort of shift.
Hard, but not impossible. We've learned that lesson through COVID. Something that would have taken us a decade has taken us a year. Some of the shifts we've been able to make this year. So I'm gonna choose.
You mean like creating a fully online school?
Yeah, like that. Are there any other questions?
One comment that I want to be sure to make is that, because of the timing of COVID in the midst of this process, right? We, as this work moves forward, we want to make sure not to lose the importance of the work of that original committee of 13 dedicated students, but we also don't want to be over reliant on it. So, moving, because it is 13 dedicated students, right, that are now a year away from those conversations. So while, their concepts were alive and appreciated, I think it's moving forward, it's going to be important to have an active group of students that's participating along the way and to begin to mix those students in with other perspectives in a way that is, supportive of them, right, in the process, so that everybody can begin to learn from each other, and you've got something sustainable. If you hadn't had COVID in the middle, you've already done that, but that's just one of the special circumstances that I think is going to be important to pay attention to as you move ahead.
So is the board, are you in favor of us continuing on this path and moving into the implementation committee phase of this portrait of a graduate work?
I certainly am. I mean, I think it's really inspiring. Obviously, a lot of thought and time has gone into crafting what you have to date. It's impressive. I think it's an excellent roadmap. So I am supportive of moving forward.
I am as well.
I'm wondering if we could do a motion, Mary, to advance the portrait of a graduate work to the implementation committee.
I will
I'll
make
make
a
that
motion.
motion.
You all have to fight over it. All right. So the motion
We'll all
is
make that motion.
to advance to the implementation stage of the portrait of the graduate work by roll. Polly,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and did Kevin join us yet, Morgan?
Nope.
No, okay. Mary is an aye. And Polly, did I call on you, Polly?
Yeah, I said aye. My internet's
Okay.
not doing so great.
Okay, no problem. Okay, great. There we go.
Okay. All right. If there are no other questions for Wendy, I'm sure she would probably like to not stay on for the rest of our board meeting.
I'm sure that both the students and the committee would be very happy to hear of your support in continuing the project forward. And I think it's exciting work, and there was palpable excitement, some caution, but excitement among the committee. And, so that's great. It's great to have points of that, right, in the midst of all these other things that we're working our way through, which are less exciting. So.
Before you move off, Wendy, I just want to say I so appreciate your patience with us and with our system, because Wendy has definitely been that voice on the side around the Portrait of a Grad work, and Jody and I have definitely had some other plates that have been distracting us in the last year. So Wendy's patience and her vision to continue to move us forward in this direction, through this consultation has really been appreciated. And I know we wouldn't have had the capacity to get where we are right now without your support. So thank you so much for all you're doing to help us, Wendy.
It's been fun. It's been fun to work with folks around, this kind of, like I said, a little bright spot, so thank you for that. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I will perhaps see you again soon.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Polly,
Okay.
Polly,
What's that, Lynn?
with us for a little bit.
Yep, I haven't gotten a notice yet, so.
Mary, do you think we should go to the Virtual Learning Academy option while we still have Polly?
Yeah, why don't we do that? Because we need her if we're going to make a motion. Or if we need action on something, yeah. So we could do that and then circle back to Morgan afterwards.
Okay, so last month, Gab did a presentation around the Virtual Learning Academy option that we currently have in place. And she presented an idea about piloting the Virtual Learning Academy next year to see if this would be a viable option that might attract more students to consider that as an option instead of homeschooling. And at the high school level also, could it be a viable option to attract other tuition students to our program? So the feedback that you gave, Gab, as a board is, can you come back with more financial information so we can have a better sense of cost associated with this? And she's been working really hard in the couple of weeks since our last board meeting. So she has a presentation to go through, and then we're more than willing to answer any questions and have a conversation afterwards.
All right. Hopefully Lynn and Morgan are going to help me out with some of this. But first, Morgan has to give me some capabilities. Is Morgan out there?
Okay, you should have capabilities now.
Okay. I can't see your name, so I didn't know. So is it better if I present this? Is it bigger if I present it?
Yes.
Whoa. Okay. So we broke down some of the financials and the numbers. We have done a survey of current virtual academy students. There's some hybrid folks in there. I think some principals sent it out to their hybrid kids. And then we also reached out to the information that we have about homeschool students. So for K6, we've got, I should have put the totals on here. I think it's, I want to say 58 total. K6 potential students who are interested in a virtual option. We don't, kindergartens, these are the next year. So this 6 students for grade 1 are the current kindergarten students, if that makes sense. So this kindergarten student just happened, I think one of the parents has an older student who got the survey and put one in for her kindergartner, but there would be, I think, more kindergartners here. I think with these numbers, we can do a K6 option with 3 K-6 teachers spanning 2 or 3 grade levels, depending on the numbers, an interventionist, and then somebody to consult for unified arts, which didn't work that well this year anyway, the way we're doing it. So that's that. Morgan did some work on this equalized pupil information. So of these students, there were 12 homeschool students interested in a potential virtual option. And for every 7.5, that's a funny way to talk about kids, but for every 7.5 students, you know, we're gaining about $115,000. So you can see the numbers here, you know, to do the total K-6 would be $304,000. And, you know, if we had 15 kids that we brought back in through homeschool, that would be offset $230,000. So that's sort of where that's at. Are there any questions about the sort of the K-6 option?
So one of the things I just want to add here is, you know, we have every year we always have a certain number of students who whose families do an approved homeschool plan through the Agency of Education. And when COVID hit, we saw an increase of 50 students that chose the homeschooling option this last year. That's in addition to the number of students that Gab has had in the Virtual Learning Academy and the number of students who have done the VTVLC option as well. So I think that when we're thinking about this, one of the populations of students that we're really thinking about are, of those 50 students, how many would naturally continue in homeschool, and how many could we, how many would just enroll back in the public school, and how many could we maybe entice to join the Virtual Learning Academy. So the figure that they're trying to give you is kind of an important one, because it does matter if those students come back to us in terms of that impact on equalized pupils.
And I'll just add one more thing that's related to that. We did have several parents say that they were considering homeschooling if there wasn't a virtual option. So I don't know the exact numbers on that or how much of a difference it would make, but that's just another perspective of some parents that that might go that way as well. So before we talk about the next piece, which is the 7-12 option that we could potentially bring on, this is a little bit related to what Mary was talking about earlier, but I wanted to make sure that people were clear what's already sort of in place, because what I'm proposing is to sort of build on what's already in place as we move forward with this. So at Enosburg, there's a Flexible Pathways Academy option, which is completely proficiency based, and there are no credits associated with it. So these students are graduating completely with proficiencies and evidence and a special transcript. We have graduated 2 of these students so far. We just had one senior get accepted with the alternative transcript, the no grades transcript to Castleton this year. We have a full set of equivalent proficiencies. So that's just part of our policy that we have. You can get 4 credits of English or the equivalent. So we have a set of equivalent proficiencies already laid out for 9-12. Again, we have 10 students right now piloting that. And then as we've moved forward, we've been working on this for a few years. One of the things we realized that we needed, and this is sort of related to what I was saying to Mary earlier, we added content advisors who are, their job is to approve evidence. So we have those people in place at Enosburg. They've been in place all year. So we have 6 content advisors. And they have time in their schedules. but we only have 10 students piloting this program. All the ninth graders have mastery transcripts, so they they all have the potential to sort of move into a flexible pathways academy option. But I just thought I would lay that out because that's sort of where my thinking is around this. It requires knowledge of these things that are in place. So for middle school, one thing that we've really found is that these folks are a special crew, middle school, and they really need like they need some wrapping. And so in order to sort of, I guess I was sort of getting creative with the health and PE requirement and thinking that if we could find the right person, this person could be like a wellness / advisor person for the 7-8 kids, and that would really fill a need. And then we would draw on the existing high school teachers for math and ELA and use the existing high school FPA structures that I just talked about for these students to create evidence around some of the other proficiencies, which we would have to break down a little bit. I think we'd have to do some work on proficiencies there. But these folks would essentially be accessing the Flexible Pathways Academy option, but for middle school and with some specific instruction in math and ELA. So really it's one teacher and drawing on the existing staff at the high school. Any questions about that piece? Okay. So the high school.
Actually, I have a question. Sorry, took me a minute to process.
Okay.
So on that previous slide, so if you have that one teacher, and would they just be working with those 14 students, or would they be also accessing other classes in the district, or is that their sole responsibility?
I'm thinking this would be their sole responsibility. They would be like I don't know how to describe this if you don't have a context for it, but they would be like these kids' touch point. They would be like the person that is connecting with these kids, getting to know these kids really well, getting to know their families really well, understanding their academic needs really well, meeting with them daily, and helping them sort of navigate both their formal classes like math and ELA, but also the development of evidence to meet those other requirements like global citizenship and science. Does that make sense? So at the high school, we did less numbers gathering. So I gathered numbers from our current VTVLC crew and our current 8th graders to see, how many people would be interested. But I just want to add that I think that this high school option, if we were to market it well, could draw homeschool students at the high school level, as well as just other students at the high school level who might be interested. There are quite a few students, especially at the high school level, who work and do much of what Mary was talking about. They're doing things in other places. They either have hobbies or talents that they're pursuing. They're old enough to work. They're accessing other things outside of school. And for a lot of our students in this area, the time structure of school is a real barrier. And so I think that there are a lot of other students that would benefit from this model in our district at the high school level. So I only surveyed the current VTVLC students as well as the 8th graders. So that's what these numbers are. But I think that there's probably another market there as well.
And I think when you're saying market, Gab, I think you're thinking beyond our existing students. So, as a high school who receives tuition students, if, you could potentially end up with high school students who live in Brighton or in, you know, another, it could be some, I can't think of the name of a school in the southern part of the state that is not a part of a union, but it could be a tuitioning student from any town that has tuition students that could access this because it would all be virtual.
I definitely think that's something we should be thinking about. You know, our numbers have consistently, our enrollment has consistently been going down. And I think that this is definitely something that could help us.
Wouldn't VL help me? VL, VTC, no, VL.
BTVLC, yeah.
Thank you. Wouldn't they capture a lot of these kids?
I think Flexible Pathways Academy, the model is very, very different from BTVLC. I think what we found was that most of our students were not very successful with the model. I think I probably have 2 students, maybe 3, who really, really are like, love these modules. I really wanted to learn about this. I'm good with getting work done. But I don't think it's broad. I don't think it meets the needs of a lot of our students. I think of students, students that go to Cold Hollow who are real workers and have real talents and real skills in different areas. And school is just, it's a structure that doesn't work very well for them. And VTVLC would not be an option for, that type of student. That's not. So it's a very, I think VTVLC addresses the needs of very few, a very limited set of students.
So let me just, for clarification, so the flexible, is this the online flexible pathways? Basically, is that what that is? This is the online version of flexible pathways, and then there's the flexible pathways for kids who are in the building. Is that correct?
Like the Flexible Pathways Academy option. I guess I am suggesting that we scale what's already happening with Flexible Pathways Academy to better meet the needs of students who might otherwise choose VTVLC, but maybe not be so successful with it.
I'm wondering if there's a vocabulary issue here with there's multiple meanings of flexible pathways. So flexible pathways could be any number of things in terms of how students, it could be that you take a college course at BTC or CCV, or you could access your learning in a variety of different ways. What Gab is describing is a kind of the school within a school model that exists at Enosburg right now, that those students, it does not require their daily physical presence in the building. They can do the learning complete, in a much different way, which is different than the Vermont Flexible Pathways law. So I think I'm wondering if the language is confusing.
Yeah, I mean, the Flexible Pathways Academy is like a structure with these 10 students that we have right now that are accessing a completely proficiency-based graduation set of requirements.
So that's what I was wondering is, so there's kids who are in your building accessing the Flexible Pathways Academy. Is this proposal for a Flexible Pathways Academy, but virtual?
I mean, the reality—
Or is it the both?
It's both. I mean, right now, those kids don't have to be in the building. Many of them are in the building, but they don't have to be.
So then is the increase just mainly because you feel like there will be more kids accessing it?
I think when we're talking about, I think the thinking around this is, do we have a set of students who are doing virtual learning this year that might want to continue with that model? And we aren't very happy with VTVLC as a full-time option for them. So, what could we offer them that might be better or meet their needs better than VTVLC as a full-time option. Does that make sense? Sort of.
Yes.
I
I guess,
mean, this year we're using VTVLC as the totally virtual option.
correct. And
And
so,
it's not working all that well
right.
for most of the kids. So
Right.
if we were to offer a K-12 option to be virtual, this is one proposal. This is one option.
Got you. I'm getting confused with the Flexible Pathways Academy, which is basically like kind of, the demonstration of proficiencies. You don't have to be in the building. You already have that in existence. That already exists, right? So I didn't know if this was an other, like a virtual academy other, or is this just an extension of your Flexible Pathways Academy that you already have? Does that make sense? Am I not?
I guess I'm not positive yet.
Okay.
Is that a reasonable way to put that, Lynn? I don't know enough about the structures or how. Yeah, go, Lynn.
So I wondered when you were going to do that, Gab. The answer to that question is dependent on the numbers in that column over there. So it feels like there may be space to make this a part of what already exists, but it would be dependent on the availability of the existing advisors, how much time they have in the schedule and how much they could take on to their existing caseload. Is that what you're, Gab, did I accurately reflect that?
Yeah, I think so.
There's still work to be done in terms of, the high school principals are assigning, courses to the educators and looking at the number of students who are enrolled in all of those courses. So there's just not enough information yet to know if it could roll right into that existing structure.
I'm just curious, and I don't know if there's a way to get to this number, but can we know essentially what the cost per pupil would be for this specific program? Is there a way to get to that, to just have an idea of how much we're spending on each kid in this program versus our other programs, our other schools?
Do you mean this proposed program, Emily, or do you mean the existing Flexible Pathways Academy?
The proposed program, the new program that we're looking at now.
I think to the extent that if we go forward with this and next year we know we have 30 kids who signed up and we had this amount of staffing cost and this amount of stuff cost, we could do that. It gets a little bit tougher to figure out when we're talking about sharing some staff or pulling staff in for just pieces and parts, because you already own them, and it's a matter of trying to figure out what would you allocate to this newer program. I think the financial, the budgeting challenge, and Gab tipped to this at the beginning, is that if you give the green light and we move forward with this program, the budget is going to go up because we're going to be hiring people for it. What we don't know is how many additional kids we're going to pull into the system, which will drive your tax rate down, and how many kids we otherwise would have lost out of your system, which over the next 2 years would drive your tax rate up if we hadn't had that piece in the budget. And so I think even 2 years, 3 years down the road, we may still be guessing a lot as to whether, at least from a financial point of view, it was a good decision.
So at the start, we talked about this being a pilot proposal, so that if we move forward with this, we're in this year where we have a substantial amount of ESSER money available to us to be able to be innovative and creative and try to find different ways to engage our learners. So if we were to use this opportunity to pilot something like this, if I were you, And if I were considering, moving forward and approving this, I would say to us, you need to give us a check-in in October and let us know what the numbers look like. And then, let's look at when we're budgeting next year, let's look at where we are in terms of how many students actually came. And then what do we know about those students who would have been in homeschool? How many tuition students did we draw to the program? Things like that. So that those certainly could be expectations that could be established around this. So the ask for right now is just for the one pilot year, and whether or not this becomes something that's economically feasible to continue beyond this point in time.
And
Yeah,
Lynn, are you saying then, Lynn, that the bulk of the numbers that have been kind of highlighted on Gab's slides that would be coming from ESSER funds, because we certainly didn't have this built into the budget, the budgets that we just passed.
So I think that's where the money would have to come from, is ESSER, because you just hit the nail on the head. We didn't plan for this. We didn't see this when we were building budgets last fall. So right now we're in this strange place because we pulled this virtual academy out of thin air. We were able to staff it without adding any additional staffing costs, or not much for staffing costs. And we promised when we did that we would give schools back their staff members at the end of the year. So we can't fund it. We can't staff it that same way for this pilot program. We're going to need to be able to pay for these outside of those district budgets. So we would have the capacity. This would be something that we think would be allowable under, Morgan, can I say we think this would be allowable under ESSER?
And as far as the ESSER monies go, if we move forward with this, are we depriving other programs or needs within the SU of needed funds, or is there plenty to kind of go around and kind of support this pilot program, but also kind of tend to some of the other needs that we might have throughout the SU for some of that funding? I don't know what kind of money we're talking about as far as the overall amount.
Is there a next slide, Gab? Is there totals?
Yeah.
So I think that's the budget that Gab is talking about. So right around 400,000. And so when we think of that in terms of, the desire to do this has to do with meeting the needs of students, and some students have done really well in this model, and at the same time drawing in other students to this program. So we have, in terms of ESSER funding, we have several $1 million overall. So would it be taking something away from another program? It's hard to say that, Mary, because we're kind of, it's not attached to anything else at this moment. So we still, even if it was taking that chunk of this money, I feel like in the visioning work that we've done for that ESSER money so far, we still have a substantial amount of money that we're going to be able to put towards efforts around social emotional learning and engagement and academic proficiency within the other systems that exist. So I can't really say that it's taking, it's making something else not happen. I'm looking at this as, I think we have enough money to do what we're imagining. Morgan, do you want to add to that, or Jody?
Yeah, I would just say that there is a finite bucket of money. So at some point we're going to be making these sorts of trade-off decisions. It's a much huger bucket than we're used to seeing up here. And so it's not like if you give us the go ahead, Lynn's going to be dropping emails to folks tomorrow saying that we're not funding their pet project, because I don't think we're there yet.
One of the priority areas for the pandemic response planning is about engagement. So re-engaging students with school. And I see a very clear connection line between this work and that priority area from the agency about re-engaging students with school.
And Jody, are you kind of alluding to that we're pulling, we're possibly pulling in some homeschoolers, and we're also kind of listening to the families in the community that say if we don't provide an online, like a virtual option, they may choose homeschooling over having the kids engage, those students engaged in the district.
Yes, absolutely. So it's a piece of that, looking at what do our students and families need from us in order to best engage in their education. And this is, the potential expansion of kind of some existing assets that we already have, and then also some assets that developed this year because of the pandemic. I think that is a great way to really meet the needs of more of our families and engage them in school with us rather than losing them out of our system.
Gab, do you think that there's a way for the kind of the brick and mortar unified arts to be incorporated into the other stuff that's virtual?
Can you say more about that?
Well, yeah, so if you had like your online stuff, 4 days a week, but they actually come to, a middle school, to do music or art or something like that. Can you, with the logistics of getting that incorporated, be just astronomical, or do you think you could make that happen, or do you think it's worth it? Or
I don't know if it could, I don't know if it could happen next year, but I think one of my visions or dreams as I was thinking about like what are the possibilities here is, what if it wasn't COVID and kids could interact and also be in a more flexible learning environment some of the time. So I think the answer to that is yes. I don't know how complicated it is in terms of like staffing and going into buildings and transportation and equity. And like, I think there's a lot of questions about that, but I think that's one of the ideas is like, what could we do in person as well? What could that look like? Our kids going on ski trips together, our kids, going on field trips together while still engaging in more flexible scheduling type environment, learning environment. So
I think the answer is if they opt to, yes, Rick. So I think about this as being similar to a homeschool experience. So if a family chooses to homeschool their child, they can choose to participate in up to 40% of their courses within the public school setting. So you can be a fully homeschool student and you can attend math class and every day, and then you can come in for PE and music 2 times a week or 3 times a week, as long as it doesn't exceed 40% of the core curriculum. So I would see the students enrolled in this option as being really similar to that. So if they had a passion around music and they still wanted to participate in music, they could physically go in and take the music class in the public school. Gab's right in terms of equity. Not all students would have that ability in terms of midday transportation. They might not have someone that is available to them to make that happen. And her thinking around how to structure Unified Arts this year is that there would be opportunities, but they'd be structured by one person or as a consultant rather than the 30 that we had trying to do this work this year. So
I think something else that teachers talked about and families appreciated was mid-year, we did that big event. And I think if we thought about having more regular events, that those could also serve as opportunities for students to experience the arts in different ways.
Can I ask a question? I want to preface what I'm going to ask you by telling you that I work at Vermont Tech, and we for many years have run a program for accelerated high school seniors called the VAST program, right? So we have these high school seniors that join us, and we treat them like freshmen. And it's not unheard of for sometimes them to be so excited about being a college freshman that they forget to do the work. And so it's good that there's somebody like myself or a program director or a faculty member to kind of keep them on track. So I'm concerned about the numbers that we're talking about at this moment in time. And if there's any sort of like a screening process you would use before you would let somebody enter into this kind of a venture. I just worry that, like right now, we've done virtual college for a year, right? Like it stunk. And one of the things I love most about my job is that when I hear of a student who is struggling, I can grab them in the hall, like some of you guys do, right? Like you grab that student and you pull them in and say, okay, like what's going on? Let me help you. And it might not be that they're struggling in math. It might be that their car's broken and they can't get to math class, right? So we can't do that in this virtual world. So I know in my heart of hearts that we've lost a lot of students who just sort of slipped off into the ether because there wasn't any human to get in touch with them. No matter how hard we tried by calling and emailing and texting, like we just couldn't recapture them and bring them back in. And help them salvage whatever there was left to salvage. You know, they just sort of fell off the cliff. So I worry more about that happening when we talk about high school students. You know, when I have a VAST kid who's come in because they're a high achieving student and they've slipped over the cliff with me, if they do that in October, I can send them back to you. If they do that in April, they're done, right? They've jeopardized their high school diploma. So that's my concern with something like this, that how will we make sure that these are students that are ready for this and that really can be successful?
So
and I don't mean that as a criticism. I just, that's my concern.
Yep, I get it. So I have an answer for you because we have experienced this, and we've created, I worked really closely with Maggie Cavazos, who was at the last board meeting, to create some modules for students to sort of move through in this program. So, you know, we've been working on this at Enosburg for a few years now, and we have seen the holes. And it's been a really safe way to experiment with this type of learning and to figure out what it is that kids need in order to sort of come in. And there is a big learning curve because they have to learn, they have to know the proficiencies in order to be able to create projects around the proficiencies in a way that's meaningful. And so there can be a really big gap there. So the advisors are key. So in my plan that I proposed last time, there's an advisor for every kid. And so that person would be sort of constantly checking in on that student. And there's also, I think there's 3 modules that we are going to require kids to go through in order to, you know, be in the program. So they'll have to complete those modules before they start anything. So that's what we've got in place for high school students. I think it's also problematic for K-8 though. So one of the things that I think we would need to be really cognizant of is making sure that we instituted orientations for new students mid-year, and it's been pretty successful. We haven't had too many kids who have actually gone to the orientation and completed it and had a problem. So I think that initial contact with the teacher at the K-8 level is really key. And also at the 7-8 level, that's one of the reasons that I think there needs to be an advisor. Meets with those kids every day, gets them up in the morning, knows if they haven't gotten up and shown up to advisory, they're checking in with their families. I think that human contact initially is key. Like you can't just be like, oh yeah, online school. There has to be like a face-to-face interaction with the person that you're going to have a relationship with and that's going to check in on you and is going to, you know, send Officer Lynch out to your house if you're not showing up. You know, it is definitely harder virtually. There's no question. The numbers on it, though, I have some pretty specific numbers. The kids who really struggled have either gone back to hybrid, or I think we have one that is really just off the radar. And everybody else we've been able to get back. So yeah, it's not for everybody, for sure.
Any other
I
questions?
think this seems just like a really cool, innovative idea and an awesome way to meet the needs of kids who learn a little bit differently and may not want to do that whole in-person piece. I think I don't want to use the word struggling, but I'm just really in my mind wondering about those ESSER funds and kind of doing an inventory of each of our schools and what do each of our schools need and how could these dollars be attributed to the greater district, and then just evaluating the needs of all schools, including this really cool idea of a virtual academy. I just feel like I'd be really curious and open to hearing more of an assessment in terms of what do each of our schools need and what could those ESSER funds be used for.
Jody, do you want to talk about the comprehensive needs assessment that you linked in the board packet?
Yes, so attached with the board packet was a comprehensive needs assessment, as Lynn said, that's part of the pandemic response planning. You probably saw it. I hope you didn't spend a whole lot of time reading all 20 whatever pages of it that it was, because it's a pretty big meaty document. And it did identify some of the, you know, largest overarching needs and are thinking about how to address those needs. So there is, you know, the next step is to kind of dive deeper into that and come up with some goals and some strategies and action steps associated with the goals, and then a plan for implementation and evaluation and the funding source as well. That's sort of our next step. And it, as I said earlier, one of the 3 priority areas is about engaging students in their learning. And so I absolutely do think that we have some students who really were successful with virtual learning, that it works for them. And so being able to pilot, I think is the word that you had used, right, Gab? To be able to pilot, what does that look like if we are trying to continue and scale up also some of the other programs that we've had in the past that were very engaging for students, and maybe is keeping some kids in school that we might otherwise lose to either homeschooling or even dropping out. You know, I think that that is something that we could take a look at and take a look at. There is data specific to engagement in that section. You know, for example, one of the data pieces is about how our high school kids were feeling pre-pandemic, as measured on the youth risk behavior survey about school and whether they felt that it was relevant to them or not. So there's some interesting data in there about that from pre-pandemic times. And, you know, I see it as an opportunity, and I see a very clear line sort of back to this idea of coming out of the pandemic educationally by being very thoughtful and examining where some places that we have made some changes, seen some gains, and want to continue in that direction because it's best meeting the needs of our students, even though we may not have thought that way prior to the pandemic. What we've learned is that now this is an asset to us, and it's an asset for our students in order to engage them in learning in a different way.
I think just to tag on to that, I think, sorry, I keep relating this back to the work that I'm doing at the college level, but I've worked at the college for like 20 years, right? So if a year and a half ago you said to me, oh, what are your needs going to be in the fall of 2021? I would have been like, bing, bing, bing. I knew. This pandemic threw me like I don't really know, but we're struggling with this sort of the same idea. And I think that right now, what I struggle with this idea is I like the idea of this. I like this idea because it opens up a door for students who are thriving in this format. And it gives an option for parents and or students that are maybe not comfortable yet and won't be comfortable by the fall to sit, not shoulder to shoulder in a classroom, but kind of close together. And so this gives them an out, right? So there's a lot of pluses there. I think what is concerning to me is the numbers. And I think maybe that's just sort of sounds like Emily has that same concern. And I think maybe that part of that is, I don't know that I understand the numbers well enough to know, like I know one of the things that Gabby had on there was like the middle school health teacher, like 70 grand, right? Like, well, that's kind of a lot of money. Like, do we have it? Is this what's the right number of kids to make this the right thing to do? So I think there's a lot of value here, just understanding if it's sort of cost effective. And also, like you guys said, this world that we exist in now, where suddenly there's money in our hands that wasn't there before. It's this weird dynamic. I mean, we have that happen to us now. Like, quick, how can we spend $100,000, right? Like, what? Like, that never happened before. So.
And it's not 100,000, it's north of 9 million, which is significant, especially when you consider the size of our normal operating budgets. In terms of the impact that Gab presented earlier, the other point is if we are planning to use ESSER money for this, the cost is coming out of that bucket, but the counting of the kids is going to be impacting your local budget and over those 2 years. So I think if this conceptually is something that you're interested in, there's not probably an easier way to ease into it and try it for a year.
And are those ESSER funds available just for this next budget year, or?
We can spend them until 2024. There are different pockets that at different times, but basically we have a pretty long runway to spend it.
Yeah, I really like the idea of this, Gabby, and I think, I can probably speak for the board at this point to say, I think a lot of us like the idea of it, for all the reasons I said before. I was thinking, like, I guess if we do this, then and if it is sort of one-time money, we should just be clear with folks, like, we can't promise this forever. Like, we're going to do this for this year and see how it goes, but maybe it'll get bigger and better, right? Like, and we don't have to spend it all this year. We've got a longer runway. So,
well, that's part of when we've been thinking about the recovery planning, it's tempting to, invest in these solutions that we think will be short term, right? Like we could hire 10 more interventionists, and so that might get us some impact right now, but then that falls away because you can't sustain that over time. So sustainability of our thinking has been a big part of our planning for how we're going to use this ESSER money. So with this pilot project, the idea is we would have to be able to demonstrate to you as a board that this is sustainable. Like you're drawing in enough students to this program for this to be sustainable over time without it having a direct negative impact on your tax rate. You're increasing your equalized pupils, or you're increasing the number of tuitioning students from other parts of the state in order to make this viable to continue.
So the other thing is, I would really like you guys to try as best you can to measure outcomes, right? So when you're trying to measure cost effectiveness, we do a really good job of measuring the costs, right? But we don't do a very good job of measuring outcomes. So even if this program ends up costing a little bit more, but we have better outcomes for some of our students, it's probably worth doing to some extent. You know what I'm trying to say?
Right. And in a way that may be easier to see. So let's say we do a year and it seems successful enough that you want to run it out through the length of ESSER, you may get to a point where the virtual academy is not your smallest school in the SU, and you may get to a point where the measurable academic data looks better in the virtual academy than in some of our brick and mortar schools. And then at that point, as a board, as long as it's not ridiculously expensive, the cost effectiveness argument maybe isn't as important as those outcomes.
Well, that's where I was kind of going. So sorry, I had to jump out. But what I was thinking about when I was the presentation part is, you're hiring a teacher with 14 kids. Like if I only had a class size of 14, I would have thought I won the lottery, right? I mean, the outcomes that you could probably have with 14 versus somebody with a caseload or a class size of, 60. If you're a high school student, you would, oh, sorry, did I break up?
You're lagging.
So that's where my thinking, that's where my thinking was going, was that, is this cost effective? But again, I'm completely in supportive of a different pathway for kids to access education. So it sounds like I'm exactly where everybody else is sitting.
And so I have a quick question. If we do the pilot, Morgan, it sounds like we would have the potential to continue some of the funding for the staff while we figure out, that revenue versus spending kind of piece. And are we actually pulling in some revenue based on equalized pupils and homeschoolers coming in and tuitioning kids at the high school level from other communities that have choice? If we moved beyond where we were funding the staff and the program through the ESSER funds, how then would it be? Because we would have kids from potentially NMB, from Enosburg, Richford. So this would be kind of under the SU umbrella, and then we would be tuitioning our kids, like we would then be kind of tuitioning kids in from the separate districts?
So there are questions that are harder to figure out than the financial piece, and that is one of them, is where these kids are going to be housed, and what'll it say on their diploma. The challenges that somebody brought up earlier around in a virtual learning environment, how do you enforce things like kids showing up and kids actually doing the work? Those I think are the tougher nuts to crack than how we're going to pay for it and how we're going to, what the impact on the tax rate is going to be. I don't have those answers yet. I don't know if that conversation has moved on radically since I last checked in, but these are all the things that we're discussing. And if the board wants to move ahead, we're going to have to figure that out.
Okay.
Hey, can we use some ESSER funds to pave the parking lot of Bakersfield?
There she goes again.
I'm gonna just try to slip that in at every board meeting till I'm gone.
Enosburg Elementary needs it too, just saying.
You still have capital reserve funds in Bakersfield, Jean Marie?
Jean Marie, you gotta fix your drainage first.
So Lynn, if I am understanding from you, what you all would like is as far as the action on this would be a motion from the board to do for the 1-year pilot program, which would be funded through ESSER funds. And then, we would, sounds as though, we could reconvene in the fall at some point, maybe later fall, to kind of really get a sense for numbers, enrollment, and all of that later in the fall.
I could.
And that and it also sounds as though there's this component that we would want to kind of embed in the hiring, whereby it's kind of understood by the teachers that would be hired specifically for this, that it's just a 1-year pilot program.
So yes, and at the same time, we would make it known to teachers that even if there was not a pilot in year 2, if we didn't move forward, we are always hiring teachers. So the reality is, if they're doing really good work in this, if something happens that you don't proceed, the likelihood would be very strong that they could roll into another position somewhere in the organization. The other part of this is, you know, I still have to go through the regulatory process with Secretary French to make sure that I can get approval for this programming. And I'm anticipating that we will be able to. In our hiring, we will be clear that their assignment is the Virtual Learning Academy. And if Morgan's going to help me wave some sort of magic language wand, that we would have the ability to assign them into a physical brick and mortar school if a barrier presented itself to us. There is no shortage of need, so I know that I could roll them in.
And Emily, when you were speaking earlier, I just wanted to circle back and make sure I'm kind of acknowledging your ask, which was, you know, kind of around a general accounting across the district. But I don't know, you know, if you want to, do you feel like you need that accounting in advance of an action, you know, or a motion to kind of move forward with the pilot program?
Yeah, no, I don't think I need it in advance. I think I'm just curious to see as we move forward. I mean, Morgan said we have a long runway to use these ESSER funds, and it's a substantial amount of money. So I guess I just asked that, well, we're, you know, trudging forward on this really cool idea that we, you know, take what was in the board packet, that assessment, and just dive deeper and just simultaneously do that too, and make sure we're looking at all of our schools as what could be from this money.
One thing that we didn't mention, Emily, is that each of the local schools did a needs assessment, and our comprehensive needs assessment was built upon the data from the local schools' comprehensive needs assessment. So we do have that already. I'll look at what some of the individual needs are within each of those school
Okay.
buildings.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see that.
That doesn't feed into the overall what we send off to the state. So what the way the plan gets written is at the SU level.
Any further discussion on the Virtual Learning Academy pilot program? Would someone like to make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay, great. By roll, Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
Get the clear motion. There was a little bit of discussion, so I just want to make sure I have it right.
So the motion, and Lynn, correct me if I'm wrong, the motion is that the board agrees to a 1-year pilot program for the Virtual Learning Academy. The funding is coming from ESSER funds. And I don't know, Lynn, do you feel like we need to include this kind of caveat around staffing in the motion, in the formal motion?
No, I'm working on my other screen in our notes, and I've captured that in our designee sheet. So Morgan and I are both aware that that needs to be in the language of the contract, and Jamie's on here too. So I think just like what you just said should suffice for your motion.
And Mary, I'm assuming K to 12?
Yes, K to 12. And Lynn, just a question on the comprehensive needs assessment. Are we circling back to that? I mean, we dipped into those waters a little bit in the course of the conversation we just had, but I can't remember if that's in yours, because I did have a couple questions specific
Actually,
to that.
it's in my report, yeah.
Okay, so we'll be talking about that. Okay, great. Okay, so we did get a little out of order there, just because we wanted to make sure we captured Polly in that, both of those kind of discussions and actions. So Morgan, maybe we'll pivot back to the financial and business report now.
Okay. Hope I can get it done in the amount of time I was allotted. Everything's informational. I just need a meeting of this board in May after May 10th, which is when the central office space bids are due. Probably good to have it about a week after that to give us time to do some site visits if needed. And you guys can set that at the end under board business.
Can I just ask if anything has come back in yet? You've put the RFP out, right?
I've put the RFP out. I don't expect anything will come back in until that day.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yep. And unless there are questions, that's all I got.
Morgan, that was less than a minute.
Quick use of your 20-minute budget.
Well done. Okay, and so wait, Morgan, nothing on the central office lease either, because that is out to bid as well right now.
Correct. Those bids are due May 10th. And then
Okay.
the food service bids are due May 3rd. So we
Okay.
won't have anything until those dates.
Okay, great. All right, sounds good. Okay, well, Lynn, you are up then.
Okay, I have a few things under personnel in terms of hiring. I'm noticing now I have a typo there. We've hired Melissa Audette as the early childhood director, Jacqueline Barisi O'Connor as a special educator, Devaney Wolf as a special educator, and Caitlin Snide as a school psychologist. Michelle has been on it with hiring this year and has had great success so far. So I would ask for a motion to approve for those 4 positions.
I will make the motion.
Okay, great. By roll, Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
We also have 4 resignations. Nick DeVita, our current school psychologist and SEL coordinator, has been hired out in the islands to be their special ed director. So we're going to be losing Nick, unfortunately. We're also losing special educators John Gottfried, Viviana Hardy, and Levi Irish. Levi is actually moving into the work-based learning coordinator at Cold Hollow and Enosburg and Richford. So if you would make a motion to approve the resignations of those 4 staff members, that'd be great.
I will make the motion.
Okay, by roll, Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
And then we have listed in your board packet all of the open positions. We have quite a few. I can read them to you if you want, or you could just take a look in your board packet. Does anybody want me to read them? Okay. So we're working hard to get all of those filled as quickly as we can. We do have one thing under negotiations where we'll need to go into executive. Did you want to do that now, Mary, or do we want to wrap up and then cut people loose and go into executive at the end?
Yeah, the latter, I think.
Okay.
Could you send me the list of the positions and names and the resignations by email so I can put them in the minutes?
I can, it is in your board packet.
Oh, it's all in the board packet? Okay, then you don't need to send it, I'll get it from there.
It's in my superintendent board note, Amanda, but if you can't find it, let me know.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. So there's nothing really new in terms of legislative update from your previous district meetings. There are two bills that I didn't really talk a lot about when I spoke with you at your local board meetings. But one bill that I'm paying more attention to now is the early literacy bill that is definitely got significant momentum and broad support across the House and the Senate. So we're expecting to see that move. And we think with that bill, there will be some additional grant opportunities for early literacy initiatives around the state. So I'm eager to see how that bill ends up in its final form. And the other bill that has caught my attention recently is H106. And I won't say a lot about this other than it's the community schools bill. And it is kind of an exciting prospect for us in terms of that idea of a community school and having the ability to have some of those resources that families need to travel to access being embedded right within the school. Is kind of intriguing, and I'm loving that idea of trying to work with community partners to think about ways that we can bring things like, dentistry and potentially some medical services and mental health services, maybe even some addiction services into our community schools so that we can get broader access to families who really struggle with the transportation and the geography barrier that we face here, given the poverty level of some of the families that we serve. So that bill is intriguing to me. It's one I'm going to pay attention to. And I just wanted to point that out to you. Does anyone have any questions on anything?
Then what was the number of the early literacy bill that you referred to?
I didn't write it down because I couldn't remember it, Emily, but I'll look it up and I'll let you know. I'll look it up while Jody's talking about her part of the agenda.
Nice segue, Lynn.
Yeah.
Tag, I'm it. All right, so I did include in my board notes that I was sending you the phase 1 document for the pandemic response planning, and that I would be happy to take questions or explain anything that you would like me to address. I kind of feel bad for sending you a 16-page document, but I do also want you to know that we have just started the process of phase 2, and that needs to be submitted on June 1st, by June 1st, and that will likely be a lengthier document that you will have coming at you a little bit later. So be prepared for that as well. Mary, I know you said you had questions, and other folks may have questions about phase 1, the needs assessment as well, or the process. If people have questions about the process in general, I'd be happy to answer those.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. It's an impressive aggregation of data, and I'm sure this was really time consuming. I was glad to be able to read through all of it today. I just had a little bit of a question. I'm just scrolling through though and trying to find, it was around like mental health clinicians and counselors. Oh, here it is. I'm on page 11 of the 21, or maybe 11 and 12. So I just was wondering if you could clarify if I'm understanding the student access to school counselors, students per one counselor, and then you've got all the schools across the SU listed. And am I reading this correctly with MES, that 290 figure that we have? Can you clarify that a little for me? And then in the next column, there are a number of schools that have a 0 by them. And am I understanding meaning that they have zero access to a school-based clinician?
Yes, so Morgan and Lynn can talk to you a little bit more about the metrics associated with that. I would just briefly like to say that as we're considering data, we are really trying to use a structural equity lens to look at this as well. So that what the data that you're referring to is kind of directly connected to and consistent with that we're looking for access and opportunity data. So I don't know if Lynn or Morgan wants to field the metrics of that.
So Morgan can tell you the math part, but what we did is we really looked at FTE, Mary. So what portion of, because you don't have 280 students in Montgomery, but Montgomery has 0.4 school counselor. So mathematically that equates to 1 per 200 and whatever, I don't have that in front of me, 200 and however many students.
Yeah, I mean, it was high, 290. I mean, which is, I mean, I'm no expert, but that's clearly not enough for the need, I would guess. I mean, that seems like a fair extrapolation if from, the numbers here.
That's definitely part of what we pulled out of that data as well. Is that there's a discrepancy there, Mary?
Yeah. And so I mean, I know this is only one small part of the picture, but it's not, it's a pretty significant part when we're looking at, the kind of mental health and of our students. So I'm assuming this is going to be a pretty pronounced area of focus when we look at these ESSER funds moving forward. I know you said we have to be mindful that we don't kind of overinvest in things that then we cannot carry forward from a budget and kind of fiscal sense once this money is no longer, quite so abundantly flowing into the schools. But at the same time, when there is an emergency and kind of a level of mental health need that warrants kind of hiring, seems to suggest we need to hire clinicians for some of these underserved schools.
Yeah, we actually had a partner meeting today with our local mental health agency, and we were having these same conversations. The tricky part is there's a staffing shortage that we're struggling with a little bit, and what's not reflected there is I believe Montgomery says 0 for school-based clinicians, and they have historically had some school-based clinicians working at Montgomery, and because of COVID, that part fell off this year. So it hasn't always been that way, Mary, but there's a gap that's left behind because that clinician no longer is there. So finding people to fill that has been tricky, but yes, that we definitely recognize the need for us to really focus a lot of our attention on the mental health needs of our students.
I think one of the challenges as we go through this data and we see those, they're not anomalies, but they're big differences in terms of services per kid, is also recognizing that those differences came from being 6 separate districts. And in a lot of cases, those were choices that were made at the local level. And I think we need to figure out here at central office how maybe dictatorial is not the right word, but how we're going to balance trying to come up with some equity with having building leaders who perceive needs as differently in their buildings.
So I'm actually sharing right now what the phase 2 work is. So for each of those recovery domains that you saw present in the needs assessment, we will now go through the process of identifying the problems of practice associated with those needs, goals associated, the specific activities or action steps that go with the goals, an implementation and evaluation plan, because in a year from now, we'll need to submit another data set that is an evaluation of the goals and the specific activities that we had planned for, their effectiveness. And then whether they need, whether we want to continue them, scale them up, revise them, add new ideas to the mix. And then as you can see, this last column is the human and material resources required and how to pay for them. So from that data set that you received with this month's board notes, that is going to turn into this next phase 2 table. And that also is due to the agency by June 1st.
I feel like it's such a great opportunity with this ESSER funding to be really creative. And I think a lot of the things that families and kids are missing is an understanding of what's available to them. I think there's a huge issue in language and understanding your resources, especially for our kids that might have families who have their own cognitive delays or just difficulties processing, understanding information. There's a lot of programs out there, but people don't know how to access them. So if ESSER funds can be used, and I'm just totally brainstorming right now, but for a position like a resource navigator or a resource coordinator or a big brother, big sister program. I'm sure we have kids in our high schools who are on a human service track and need to do community service. Is there a way that we could build a foundation or help format a program where they could give back to the kids who are really struggling? I just feel like there's so many really cool and creative ideas and things that we could implement that would be really cost effective. That would make a big difference.
I totally agree with Emily. We were just doing a needs assessment too, and that was the big issue, is even teachers didn't know what the community had to offer. You know, for instance, would Spectrum Youth Services be appropriate? And we have really no idea what's out there. And so for even to connect families, yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It's that kind of creative thinking that we're trying to capture in this next phase so that we can make sure that we maximize the opportunities, because we really want to structure it through that lens of opportunities for our students. So I think that the partnership with mental health, and we have a partnership, we have a conversation coming up with Dr. Haig. So being able to like dig deeper into what do you know about from your organization's lens, and how can we apply that to our recovery work? And then I definitely hear what you're saying about that. One of the things that we had in there, and those, what you see in the column on the right is those are really brainstorms of, those are all the things that we think could make a difference. So that other idea of homeschool coordination and being able to have someone that's really focused on supporting the family and the family's connection to the school. We don't really have that as a standardized function across the organization. We have it in some small pockets in schools, and I'm not certain that those roles are clearly defined in how they differ from other more counseling type roles in the schools. So that's definitely work that we've thought of, and I appreciate that thinking about the navigator, the resource navigator idea.
Absolutely. Any of those kinds of brainstorms, feel free to send those my way. And you, of course, also will have the opportunity to review the draft plan once it's drafted as well. But if you have thinking like that you'd like to share with us as we're creating the first draft of phase 2, please feel free to send that my way. It would be very helpful.
I think it would make sense to have some sort of like a breakout group or subcommittee, something who really wants to maybe spend more time in these creative thinking sessions, if you will.
You want to talk a little about structure, Jody? Because we certainly could create space at the table for board members interested.
Yes, absolutely. So as Lynn said, we were in a meeting today, with a couple of community partners. So there are ongoing different teaming structures associated with coming up with this plan, because as you could see from the data collection, it's very comprehensive. It's it's not just academic proficiency. I mean, it really starts with that social, emotional, mental health, wellness piece. And then there's that engagement with school piece. And academic proficiency is in there as well. Not only are we looking at this from the lens of pandemic response and post-pandemic education, but we also are given the task to look at it through the lens of Act 173 implementation as well. So there are a lot of moving parts to this. It is serving as our continuous improvement plan this year. So there's that piece of it as well, to continue and build on the work that we have done in the past and know that we need to continue into the future. So yes, there are multiple opportunities for kind of subgroup meetings that happen pretty regularly. So also, if people are interested in participating in those, please let me know, because I think, you know, the more voices at the table and the more eyes with the greatest diversity of perspectives is really helpful when it comes to that kind of creative thinking, for sure.
I would definitely be interested in joining you on that. I feel like I might have some information to offer.
Great, thank you.
One thing I should have started with is the very first task in terms of the COVID response planning is I had to identify a COVID recovery coordinator, and Jody volunteered for the role, and it is a huge lift, to say the least. What she is coordinating and helping us just in terms of creating a process, because it's complicated work in a single district, but you can multiply that exponentially when you're looking at as many schools as we have across our system, and trying to really take a comprehensive look at individual schools, and then looking at it through the lens of, you know, the two different districts, and then organizationally within the SU. And she's done a really nice job of establishing a process and engaging with stakeholders and using those, turning those surveys and that feedback and that input into some of the data that we have been using. It's just been remarkable. So I can't thank Jody enough for the work she's putting into making this a really meaningful and deep process that's going to end with us having some incredible opportunities for our students. So thank you, Jody.
So one other quick thing I did want to say about the process that I didn't say, and it's very important, is that we also have a coach from the Agency of Ed who's been helping us with this, and I've been meeting with her pretty regularly. We have some data literacy trainings that I've been going to. But the great thing is that the agency really is not looking at these as final drafts. So the document that you got and that we submitted, even though there was a deadline and there was a submission necessary, it's considered a draft and it's able to be revised flexibly. And that is also true of the document that we need to submit by June 1st. So although we're living with those very real practical deadlines hanging over our heads, what's great about it is that it's an iterative process. It's not, you have to decide by June 1st and everything is cast in stone. So it's very much, you know, record your thinking, and then as you identify needs and things change, it's okay to upload a new version of your plan. So that I've been very grateful about that, given that strange dichotomy of having these super tight deadlines associated with the work. There are deadlines, but they aren't actual deadlines for real. We get to keep working on it and keep thinking about it. So that's great. So were there any other questions associated with my report? All right. So who am I tagging next?
Well, Dominic, you are next. And thanks, Jody. That's really impressive, truly.
You're very welcome. It's fascinating work.
We don't have Dom on this meeting.
Okay. So no problem. So then Michelle is next.
I have nothing to add.
Okay.
I've
Any
been
questions?
spending a lot of time with Lynn and Jody on the response document.
Great. And Heather, are you with us today?
I
don't
am.
See you on
Yep.
my screen. Okay, great.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Jamie, anything to add?
No, I don't have anything to add to mine.
Okay. Dawn? Don't know if she's with us. Morgan, is Dawn?
She's
Yeah.
on, I don't know, she's been having spotty internet.
Yeah, okay. No problem. Robin, do you have anything that you wanted to add to your board report?
I don't believe I had one this time, but I have nothing to report.
Okay. And Gabby, we talked a lot with you earlier. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to add about the virtual academy.
Nope, it's all informational and in there.
Okay, super, thank you. So, Lynn, I know we need to do an executive session, so maybe we will let everyone go who's not going to be joining for that executive session, and then I'll need a motion to enter executive.
I'll
I
move.
also want to set that meeting date, but I have a feeling that meeting is primarily just going to be Lynn and I.
The meeting date in May, Morgan? Yeah, I was going to circle back to board business after executive.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
And someone made a motion, right, to enter executive. So
Yeah,
by
I did.
roll, okay, by roll, Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye.
And you are in executive session. And you are out of executive session.
Okay, great. And we have a motion on the table to direct the chair to draft a letter and follow up with the personnel concern issue. So by roll, Polly,
Aye.
Rick,
Aye.
Jean Marie,
Aye.
Emily,
Aye.
and Mary is an aye. And so we just have other board business, which anyone have anything left for board business that they wanted to bring up?
May
We
meeting
just have
date.
to set the meeting.
Yeah, we do need to set that future meeting. So I was just looking, you said we need it to be after May 10th, eh?
Yes. Probably the week of the 17th would make the most sense.
Okay. Do we want to say we'll do it? May 19th is my husband's birthday. Can we not do it on a Wednesday?
Don't we already have a meeting scheduled for that night?
We don't. Well,
Oh.
well, I don't know. Maybe technically we do. Sometimes the May meeting, right, Morgan, is
Yeah.
kind of TBD, eh?
Yep, we do have that on the calendar, so we can.
Oh,
That's what I thought.
well, if it needs to be on that day, then I would likely have Jean Marie as vice chair run that meeting because that's Jacob's birthday. And
I don't.
but otherwise I could do it, and I would be happy to do it another day. I can do it on Tuesday. I could do it on
Emily's the
17th.
vice chair.
What's that? Oh, right. I'm sorry. Of course. Pardon me, Emily. Yes,
That would-
of course.
That would be a great
Vice
meeting to have.
No, Jean Marie told me I would never have to run the meeting, that it's just a formality.
This would be a good meeting to have a full quorum at because we're going to have two meaty bids to look at.
Yeah, and I actually do kind of want to be a part of the central office and the food service discussions, because those are pretty substantive. Anyone have flexibility to do it maybe
Could
on
do-
Thursday, the 20th?
I could do Thursday.
So
I know
my-
Rick doesn't do Thursdays. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't do Thursdays.
Right now, Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays are off the table for me until like June, the first week of June.
Morgan, what about May 12th, the prior Wednesday? We're after that date of the 10th. Would that work?
That would be okay. You might not have enough time to commit to a bid on the central office space, but that doesn't have the same timeline as the food service bid.
What if you go out 1 more week to the
Yeah.
26th?
That's what I'm thinking.
Because we've got our NMV board retreat from 5 to 8 on the 26th.
I'm a little worried about going out that late with food service as well.
Okay.
I mean, in theory, we could have a brand new company as the low bidder, and they're going to need to ramp up for July 1.
So I know people don't like Fridays. If we went earlier on a Friday, would that work?
Friday the
Sure.
21st.
Was there a problem with the 12th?
Well, we won't be able to visit any places, will we?
We won't, but we could discuss the proposals at that point, and I don't think you need to make a decision that evening.
Okay. And we would not have a meeting the next week, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I would hope not.
When
I
would
was
you
gonna
make a
say.
decision on the CO space RFPs then?
Pardon?
So we don't have a June meeting scheduled. I don't think we're planning maybe to meet again until July. I mean, we could meet in June if we needed to, but if you don't do the central office RFPs, if you don't take that up, you're gonna have another meeting to address that.
Mhm.
I don't think we can drag that on until July.
So Lynn, you're feeling like if we had it on the 12th, we haven't had time to kind of look at any of the actual spaces, whereas if we have it the following week, we've had time, all the RFPs are in, and we would have had time to kind of physically boots on the ground, see some of the spaces and to potentially be making a decision.
Right.
So what about the 21st, going back to that Friday? Because that's an awesome way to spend a Friday night, for sure.
If we started at like 4, that wouldn't be too, no, Emily can't.
No, I have kids and things.
I mean, certainly I don't want like, if I need to bow out on the 19th and that's the one that works, I just feel protective of being able to celebrate Jacob's birthday with him.
Yeah, that's
Especially
understandable.
a still in COVID birthday, because it's not like I can send him off to do something fun with his friends yet.
4:30. I just need to wait till my husband is done work to man the ship. So I could do like a 4:30 or 4:45 on that
which
Friday.
day?
On the Friday that you would reference.
Or even
The
if 5,
21st?
even if 5 is a full like hour and a half earlier than we normally start. So we could get through it. How does 5 work on the 21st, folks?
Fine.
Gonna have to bring a cocktail.
Put it in a sippy cup.
I appreciate the flexibility based around Jacob's birthday. Thank you. Okay, so let's say 5 o'clock on May 21st. And so Morgan, am I assuming then that like we'll want, because I know myself, Kevin, and who's the third person? Polly, right? On the bill for the central office space. Are you thinking, Morgan, like that once things land on May 10th, that we would be kind of moving into
think-
action to see some spaces?
I think what I will do is I will forward the bids to the three of you, forward them to the full board on May 10th. The three of you, we can find some time to have a quick discussion online and decide what, if any of them warrant a site visit before bringing a recommendation to the full board.
Great, okay.
Can I just ask for the May 21st meeting, do you need the other administrators or is it just Morgan, myself, and Dawn?
I would say let's do that. And I mean, those are going to be the most pressing things. I mean, unless there's an update with Jody's piece around the pandemic response work, Lynn, and or anything like that, that might be good for us to loop in.
We will be further along than we are now, but the due date isn't until June 1st, so we won't have a final phase 2 plan in place yet.
Okay.
Charity reached out to me with meeting dates. There's one on May 9th, so I'm sure if there's anything share worthy, we can do it.
And I can tell Jo, I'll put that in the note that if Jody has any, if she could come in and give, we can maybe have her do a brief update.
And certainly if there's anything super pressing that arises between now and then with, someone's kind of department, then we could pull in just that person.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, anything else, folks? Okay, so nice to see everyone. I just need a motion. Well, just give me a little sign that we're adjourning. Motion to adjourn.
Have a good night.
All right.
Bye.